In this Fextralife video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Deep of Night, which is a new game mode for Elden Ring Nightreign that just launched a few hours ago. I've been playing it all day. I want to talk a little bit about the patch notes, what's changed with the game, what the new game mode is, some tips for it, and just get into my general impressions of how it plays so far. So if you don't know what the Deep of Night is, it's kind of a new endless mode and a ranked mode kind of combined into one thing where players will compete together against a more challenging version of the game where you now have these like red infused enemies and bosses on the map, and a lot of enemies have more health or deal more damage, particularly the red enemies though. And then when you get like a red-eyed boss that's also red, it's very, very difficult. But the idea is that these red enemies and bosses drop new pieces of gear that have 2 positive passive buffs and 1 negative buff. And that's supposed to give you more variety in terms of what you can get and also more power, because you could potentially have 2 really good positive buffs that make your build stronger. There are also new relics that you can use in this mode that are only specific to this game mode, meaning that if you get them in this game mode, you cannot use them outside of this game mode, but they are essentially added on to your chalice. So if you have, red, green, blue chalice or red, green, yellow chalice, they'll be added on to the end of it, and there'll be 3 different colors, and each chalice has 3 different colors added onto it. So you still have to find relics that are deep relics that add on, that are the right color for the slots of, of the chalice that you have, and that can be a bit challenging. And some of these have new effects, and they also have very powerful effects, higher versions of effects that already exist in the game, but they also can have negative effects. So there's a lot of RNG in it, because you might get some really good effects, but some of the negative effects might be very, very bad. So you really have to, get a lot of these before you start getting some really, really good effects. Now, this game mode is very, very difficult when you first start playing on depth 1. It's not going to seem that much different to you unless you maybe take on a red boss like right away. It can happen where like maybe open an Everjail or the very first place you go, there's a red boss, but it's pretty rare in depth 1 for that to happen. And I think a lot of people will play depth 1 and think, what's different about this? I get a couple new weapons types with these positive benefits, and I get some new relics, but it doesn't feel that much different to me. I will mention too that there are also unique coded weapons which are red, which you may have seen like the Avarice Helm earlier that was red before this version of the game. But there are also like red weapons that have 2 positive buffs and a negative buff that can be really strong. So you can look out for those. But you might think, it doesn't seem that different to me. Why am I playing this? And then you get to depth 2 and you really find out what the Deep of Night is. And I think, honestly, the game kind of does a little bit of a disservice to you by not putting you at depth 2 to begin with. I mean, they should have called it depth 1, put you there. But it's very, very challenging. Someone made the argument to me that, because this is theoretically a ranked mode where you'll be matching with people that are at the same place as you, right? Like, you're not, when you go into ranked matchmaking or matchmaking for this, you're going to match with people that are in your depth. So you're not going to match with people that can't get through depth 1. Depth 1 is slightly harder than the regular version of the game. I would say maybe 10 to 15% harder, maybe 20%, maybe depending on RNG. Depth 2 feels like 50% harder. This is just a guesstimate, obviously. So it's maybe meant to weed out those people that are already struggling with a very beginning version of the game that aren't doing the Deep of Night, or that way you're not matching with them on this 50% harder version of the game. So that makes sense to me. But the thing really starts, in my opinion, once you get to depth 2. That's where I'm at right now. I've been playing all day. I'm still in depth 2. You start getting Everdark Sovereign boss fights for your bosses randomly. And again, you don't know what boss you're going to be facing until you're already loading into the game. So that can be challenging to really like put together a build that's like tailored for a specific boss. You have to have more of a general build. And what I like about this game mode so far is that it's very challenging. I really, really appreciate that we're not just face rolling anything anymore. We have to be a little more methodical. We can't be quite as aggressive. My win rate has basically gone from about 85 to 90% what it was normally, even with Everdark Sovereign events, down to like in depth 2, it's like, I don't know, 30%, 40% like that. It's pretty rough. I can only imagine what depth 3 is going to be like, and then depth 4 and depth 5, that's where you start getting the endless mode where you can just keep going and keep going if you want. So we'll have to see how that is. But it's definitely very, very challenging. I don't think it's going to be everyone's jam, particularly because the way depth 1 is. Depth 1, it just adds a larger RNG pool. I will say that the weapons that have dual buffs and 1 negative buff more often than not are bad. the negative buff is usually too bad for the 2 positive buffs that you get, because they're both randomized, so they're never really lining up to be a great weapon. Like, it's very rare that they'll be both good for what you want. It does happen, but you usually get one benefit that doesn't benefit you much, and then one that does, and then a negative effect. So you won't use them much. You also have very little time when you're looking at your gear to like assess whether it's better or not. So the more time you sit there and read those red weapons, you know, the more time you waste. So I think generally From has to do some balancing with them. I would actually suggest that they probably need to remove the negative effects and maybe tone down the passive effects to offset that or something. But as it stands now, the negative effects are too strong, and it widens the RNG pool of weapons that you get. So it makes the runs harder because your RNG pool is wider. That's not great. It feels like your runs are kind of determined for you by your gear a lot more than they were previously, or not a lot more, but at least some more than they were previously. And I don't like that so far. I do think they need to tweak the red weapons and the negative bonuses. On the relics, it's a bit of a mixed bag. When you get a really good relic, it feels really good, just like the base game, but you get so much trash. There's so many relics where they're like 3 good bonuses, but 3 negative bonuses. Like, you can get deep relics that have just 3 good bonuses. Those are the best ones. You absolutely want those, and they have new passive benefits, like Iron Eye applying poison and dealing damage when he uses his character skill that like triggers more if the target is poisoned, which is really nice. Or Wilder triggering bleed with his character skill when he uses grapple. There's a lot of really good new relics in there, but it's really, really RNG depending on what you get. So it can be both good and bad. If you thought they were going to maybe fix the RNG of the game, no, the RNG is even more RNG than it's ever been. You're going to have to play a lot in order to get there. Luckily or unluckily, the Deep of Night is very grindy to get all the way to the end anyway, so you're going to be playing a lot if you're ever going to make it there. I think generally I like it so far, but it's not going to be for everybody. It's definitely one of those where, like, I started off not liking it until I got to Depth 2, and then I started really liking it. It's challenging me, it's pushing me, and I like that. I remember when I first started playing Nightreign, you know, I was dying to try Cephalos. Now I can basically beat any of the bosses in the game first try, you know, with randoms, or, you know, at least with a decent group. So you definitely kind of grow into the game, and I think that's going to be the case with the Deep of Night as well. But I really appreciate that there's a new challenge, and for people who've been face rolling stuff, like wanting to be challenged, this is definitely going to be something they enjoy, I think. So I wanted to talk a bit before we wrap up this video about the new balancing changes to the game. Also, there are a series of balancing changes that came to this. We'll start with the class changes. Wilder has increased poise while casting claw shots, so he's not going to be interrupted as much. That's fine. I didn't have a problem with this in general anyway. And also increased damage dealt by claw shot to blocking enemies. I think that's just to get through enemies with like great shields. I didn't have a problem with either of these things very regularly, so I mean, it's a nice little buff, but it's not really going to change the way Wilder plays at all. Guardian got a lot of buffs. They have increased strength and dexterity gain while leveling, so their damage is going to be higher. Their Steel Guard passive has a wider angle range, so it's going to hit block attacks from like a wider angle, which makes them easier to use, which is nice. Their ultimate art, Wings of Salvation, does more damage, and they do more damage with guard counters when using a halberd. So I think this is needed. Guardian is definitely the character that needs the most buffs. I don't know if this is going to be enough for people to use Guardian regularly. I know there are some hardcore Guardians out there, and Guardian can be used very, very well in the right circumstances, but I think there are just some Everdark bosses where he doesn't perform very well against, and you're kind of at a disadvantage when you're playing him, and that kind of, particularly because his dodge roll is not that great, and some of the attacks go under his shield. So I don't know if he's going to be like more of a main than he is now, but it's definitely good to see that moving in the right direction. Duchess has had increased dexterity gain when leveling, so her damage will be higher. Increase the attack power of some dagger attacks, so she's going to do more damage when using daggers. I typically use a dagger with her almost all the time anyway. Decrease the two-handed dagger's second heavy attack damage, so that damage got nerfed. I guess that maybe was too high, I don't know. It doesn't affect charge attacks, just the second attack of a heavy attack, and increase the duration of the finale ultimate art, so you'd be invisible longer. I have noticed this. I've been playing with Tirabit. He's been playing as Duchess. I don't know what the exact duration of it. It seems like maybe it went to 20 seconds from 15. It doesn't feel like 30, but it's definitely like feels like 20, 25 seconds, somewhere in there. Raider has had increased the Great Axes and Great Hammer's ability to stagger enemies with attacks. I think this is to combat the fact that Most raiders are just using dual colossal weapons to do jump attacks, or a lot of them are. They want people to use great axes and great hammers for their weapons as well, so increasing their stagger will gravitate people towards that more. They've also increased the attack range of Retaliate, making it connect more, which is nice because the range on that was a bit short in my opinion. Revenant had the transparency of her summon spirits adjusted. This was great because if you've ever played a melee character, when Revenant's got her summons out, it can be very difficult to see the boss or whatever they're attacking. Sometimes that's a really nice just quality of life change. And players can also now move through Helen and Frederick, so you can get out of the way, like you can get through them and to what you're trying to see. So this is great. Not really any like damage or nerfs there, just quality of life improvements, which you like. Executor has increased attack power while Cursed Sword is in use. I don't know how much this got buffed, but it desperately needed being buffed. Cursed Sword was super weak against just about any other weapon Executor would use. Increase the attack power of the Cursed Sword weapon skill when the skill is in use and the blade is in its unleashed state, so they buffed the attack of it. And increased attack power of some attacks while Aspect of Crucible Beast is active. So when you're using your ultimate art, you have generally higher attack power with your attacks. So not every attack, but most of them. So I think Executor just got a buff across the boards. Notable from here that you don't see buffed are Iron Eye, he's not buffed, and Recluse are not buffed. So those seem to be in a pretty good place. I play Iron Eye mostly, Fex plays Recluse mostly, so kind of happy to see that we're in a pretty good place. There are some buffs with some of the new relics, though. We'll get into that in a minute. As far as weapon passives and special effects, basically it looks like they're just increasing stagger damage with jump attacks while dual wielding with most weapon types. So that's good. The death status ailment applied with the death flare of the Eclipse Shots. I've never really used this, so I don't really know how much that's improved or if that makes a big difference. You don't see this weapon very often anyway, so I'm not imagining it gets much use. They've capped the cumulative effects of Power of Vengeance and the Power of House Murray passives. These are on the Murray Executioner Sword and the Grafted Blade. So you can't just like stack them infinitely and then one-shot bosses anymore, which obviously needs to be fixed. And the stagger effect of guard counters trigger Holy Burst, the dormant passive there. The explosion doesn't reset the enemy's posture if it triggers. So that's good that that's fixed, because otherwise you wouldn't want to use that. A one nerf for Wilder here is that the standard attack enhanced with Fiery Follow-Up using character skill Greatsword only. This is one I run all the time on Wilder. It's so good. They made it consume stamina now, so that kind of sucks. One of the great things about that skill was that it didn't consume any, and you could just even use it point blank to save stamina and deal good damage, so that's been nerfed. They've increased the amount of fire burn effect, the fire damage on the ground from Wilder's ultimate art, which wasn't super high, but wasn't super low. His ultimate is one of the better ones in my opinion, so that's a nice little buff. Apparently there was an issue with the damage being different if you were two-handing or one-handing when using this, so that's been sorted, so that doesn't apply anymore. They've increased the duration of the Iron Eye extends duration of weak point relic effect. It was previously, I think it was only like 2.5 seconds that increased it, which is almost nothing. I don't know what they've extended this to, but I imagine that it's much more useful than it was. Even if they only added 2.5 more seconds, it would still be much better. And if they made it any more than that, then it's definitely one you could consider running. Most Iron Eyes right now have +1 character skill use, and they just hit them again to extend the duration of weak point when needed. So this isn't a mandatory relic, but it would be much better to have and would be, you know, less detrimental if you had it on a relic that had other good bonuses, and you could definitely slot it without feeling as bad about it. They have increased potency of continuous HP recoveries improved. I think this still says +1 from what I've seen. So I imagine that this is probably just it ticks faster like than it did before. That's my guess. There are a couple other ones here. The potency of Recluse activating ultimate art raises max HP has been increased, so more HP for Recluse. Yay. Activating ultimate art raises max HP. Persists until an attack is received, even after the art's duration ends. So she'll continue to have higher HP, which is kind of nice. That's definitely one of the Achilles heels of Recluse, right? Critical hits earned roots has been increased, and then the HP and FP restoration effects on weapon-specific type attacks has been increased. I still don't know if they're good enough to use regularly unless you're using fast weapons. I mean, they're certainly better than nothing, particularly FP, but the amount of HP you usually have, I don't think they're that worth it, but, you know, maybe you get them on a relic that's got 2 other good bonuses, or, you know, so it's not that bad. Everdark Sovereign Sentient Pest boss. The attack and stamina attack power against guarding Nightfarers has been increased in the final phase. Adjusted and modified the attack actions of Animus. I don't know exactly what that means. they adjusted and modified the attack, so maybe they're different. It's hard to say what that means exactly. Maybe they tweaked the AI a little bit. But they also reduced the stagger duration when Nightfarers are hit by some of the attacks of that boss. So there's a little bit of a buff there, it seems like, and a slight nerf at the same time. I don't expect this fight to be much different generally. Most people aren't guarding, so it's probably going to be more or less the same as what you're used to. I haven't fought the Everdark version yet in Deep of Night, so I'm not sure. Everdark Sarwin Equilibrious Beast. This is one that we predicted was going to get nerfed a while ago because it was so damn difficult. They adjusted the effect granted to summon condemned Nightfarers so that it can be dispelled by law of aggression, or law of regression. That's interesting. They increased the enhancement granted by the light drop from defeating condemned Nightfarers. There would be the little golden orb on the ground that would buff you. I think it would give you like health and attack power or something. So increasing that makes that more likely, and knowing that mechanic is more important. They reduced the attack power of the condemned Guardian. You know, if you have a Guardian in your group and there's a Guardian attacking, it's not going to hit as hard, so that's a nerf. They removed the effect that increases damage negation upon resummoning condemns. So obviously this is a nerf for the boss, so they're going to, you know, not have as much damage negation. Reduce the death status effect resistance of condemned Nightfarers. So obviously if you're trying to use Death Blight or whatever on them, I guess this is a strategy I never tried to employ, but it'd be easier to trigger and kill them more quickly, so that's also a nerf. Adjusted the reaction of condemned Nightfarers to player characters' range attacks. This is one that I found really irritating because I play Iron Eye a lot, is that they seem to dodge roll like a lot of the attacks. It seems like that's not going to happen as much, so that's a nerf. And adjusted targeting priority of condemned Nightfarers under specific combat roles. So they're changing, you know, what characters the Nightfarers are going to target, whether that's other Nightfarers or, you know, you or, you know, one of your party members. So I don't know if that's a nerf or a buff or just an adjustment, but I think it's likely that it's probably a slight nerf. So all in all, this boss fight has been nerfed a bit. It hasn't been nerfed as much as I thought it would, but it's definitely been nerfed. So it should be easier in general. You will see this in Depth 2 of the Deep of Night. I had it once already. That was tragic. That's all I can say about that. So anyway, that nerf was absolutely needed. Everdark Sovereign Dark Drift Knight. Increase the HP and stamina and attack power against guarding Nightfarers. So if you're like blocking, you can't just tank it infinitely, which is done a lot on this boss. So that's a buff. And increase the attack power of some of the attacks. So they've just made him stronger. This boss definitely needed a buff. It was one of the easier ones in my opinion. It was kind of disappointing how easy it was, considering I remember the first time that I played the regular version of this boss, it was very difficult. So it's nice to see a little bit of a buff here. Increase Night Tide's damage after defeating the second night boss. You can't just run around and do stuff to gain more XP and, you know, maybe go back and get your runes. If you drop them, it's harder to do. They also adjusted the spawn locations of the sentient pest that occurs while you're on Limveld that can do the Plague of Locusts to be less likely to be far away from you, so you can get to it faster, which is great. Sometimes there's just can be a run killer if it's too far away. That's a nice improvement in my opinion. They've also adjusted the penalties rate for session disconnections. It says disconnecting from a session due to network issues or quitting the game during a session in progress will result in penalties, may limit multiplayer capabilities. Rejoining the session you left will remove the penalty imposed. I have never been penalized to date for anything, even though I've quit multiple games. I've had multiple people quit on me. I don't know if this has actually done anything. I mean, I've only played with Fex and Tier since this has happened, but there may actually be disconnection penalties now, which, you know, would be new to the game. There are some bug fixes as well, a lot of them actually. I don't know if I'm going to go through all of them here, but I will look at a couple of them. Fixed a bug where Guardian's Wing of Salvation Ultramart can be interrupted by enemy attacks. I've had this happen where it interrupts you and then you wasted your ultimate, so that's great that that's being fixed. Fixed a bug where the effect of an unused Wending Grace could activate when rejoining a session after disconnection. That's a big bug. I mean, I've had Wending Graces bug on me a lot, so any bug fixes on those are great because it's just really frustrating when you have them and they don't use. And then on PC, they've made some fixes with switching targets and also improved stability in some environments, which, you know, is nice. All in all, there's a lot of quality of life improvements. I would say that most of these are buffs for your character, no matter what character. And there are a lot of new relics in the Deep of Night mode that are going to buff you as well. Very few nerfs. A lot of the bosses got nerfed except for Dark Drift Everdark, which needed buffing in my opinion. So I think all in all, this is a pretty good update. I think I'm going to do another video as we get further into the Deep of Night. Probably like some tips and tricks. One tip I have right away is get red weapons as quick as you can. even though they are typically, you know, they can have really bad secondary buffs, but if you can somehow get like one quickly, you can often have a lot of good damage very early on. Sometimes the damage alone will outweigh the secondary, like the tertiary negative effect. So if you can get a red weapon quickly, it might outweigh a lot of that negative effect. That seems to be more successful for us. But sometimes, man, those negative effects are just not worth it. Like I had one that was like 150% more Nightreign damage that killed me like a couple of times. It was bad. So you really, really got to be careful. But if you can get like an appropriate weapon that's red for you, not just any red weapon, and it doesn't have a terrible negative effect, man, you are off to the races with that. And you should be looking for those. But we'll probably do another video on this soon where we cover like more specifics on like how the other depths are and what some tips and strategies are, what some relic combinations you should be looking out for, or specific effects are in a later video. Well, I want to know what you guys think of this Deep of Night event so far, or game mode. How are you finding it? Did you like the depth 1? Are you on depth 2? What do you make of the new relics? What do you make of the new red weapons, the unique weapons? Let me know in the comments below.